I think we're ready to begin. Good morning and welcome to everyone. We're very fortunate this morning to have five knowledgeable and outspoken leaders, all of whom share a passion for education system reform. I'm going to begin with very, very brief introductions, then I'm going to make a short comment about the state of big city education, and then we're going to hear from our expert panelists. And if we have time, we'll entertain some questions near the end. First, I would like to introduce the former governor of Pennsylvania, Ed Rendell, sitting there in the center. And under Ed Rendell's watch, when he was governor, student achievement rose across all grade and subject levels. And the funding priorities that Ed pushed through were pre-kindergarten, full-day kindergarten, and tutoring. And the governor, who was also the former mayor of Philadelphia, recently published his first book, A Nation of Wusses, How America's Leaders Lost the Guts to Make Us Great. And I assume that all the leaders on the panel are excluded from that. Right here to my right, I'd like to introduce Paul Vallis, who I think most of you know is a leading voice for education reform. Paul Vallis is also known for rebuilding the most challenging school systems in America. In post-Katrina New Orleans, with the first 100% school choice district in Philadelphia and Chicago, with reforms that included eliminating budget deficits, these days Paul hits the campaign trail as the Democratic candidate for Illinois' lieutenant governor. Good luck, Paul. I'd like to then introduce somebody who's well known to all of us here in Los Angeles, the former Los Angeles mayor, Antonio Villaraigosa. As mayor, Antonio created the Collaborative Partnership for Los Angeles Schools. While Speaker of the California Assembly, he oversaw legislation to modernize public schools. And today, USC's Price School of Public Policy recently appointed Antonio a professor. Welcome to the panel today. I'd also like to introduce Tony Miller, Anthony Miller, as former Deputy Secretary of Education and Chief Operating Officer for the U.S. Department of Education. Tony utilized private sector experience to run the $77 billion agency. His leadership was key to implementing reforms that include Race to the Top, investing in innovation, and school turnaround. And hopefully in just a few moments, we will also have with us Dr. Rudolph Rudy Crew, who's presently president of Medgar Evers College at City University of New York. Rudy's focus is to increase achievement for poor and minority students, and I think most of us know that Rudy's prior focus were on these issues as he was chancellor of the New York City Public Schools and superintendent for Miami-Dade Public Schools. So we welcome each one of our panelists and thank you for your participation. So let me try to do a quick review of the state of big city education in 2 minutes. Our focus today on K-12 education is both timely and necessary. Americans believe that the K-12 system bears the greatest responsibility to ensure that young people possess the skills, knowledge, and experiences to move on to the next stage of learning and to the workforce. Even though it is clear that education is the means most conducive to building human resources, to building high-quality human capital, sadly in our nation today, all too many young people, especially those attending schools in big city districts, are not being provided a rigorous educational experience. And while there's many reasons why this is so, this state of affairs is having dire consequences on the students, their families, the communities, and our nation. We see this firsthand in academic performance. The fact is that the longer students are in school, the poorer their relative performance, whether in math and science or in history and writing. We see it in the disconnect between what high school graduates believe they possess in terms of critical thinking skills as compared to what their teachers believe. We see it in the challenges in the numbers of new college entrants in need of English and math remediation. We see it in the high percentages of employers that say that the basic skills of new entrants to the workforce are deficient. And while challenges are also present in rural and suburban settings, nowhere are they greater than in the large urban districts in terms of academic performance, dropout rates, disciplinary incidents, and preparedness for college and careers. In terms of student performance, these challenges are apparent from the results on NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. For those of you not familiar with NAEP, it comprises the largest and nationally representative assessment of what American students know and can do in core subjects. It serves as a critical barometer for understanding educational attainment, whether nationwide, in the individual states, or in our big city districts. Now, NAEP has, as you can see the bottom bullet point there, it has 4 levels: below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced. So what does that mean? Well, let's take a look at reading. Students who are at a basic level in reading understand the literal meaning of the words that they read. Students at a level of proficient and above possess far greater skills, the kind of skills that are needed to move on successfully to the next stage of learning. Students who perform at a below basic level, below basic, cannot read. In math, you can see how skills also increase as students move from a basic level to a level of proficient and above. But once again, students who perform at a level below basic do not know math. Now let's look at NAEP achievement results for the largest urban districts. In reading, for example, in 4th grade, in 2003, 56% of all 4th grade students were at a below basic level, meaning they could not read. By 2013, this percentage had declined to 46%. Yes, progress is being made, but tragically in our country today, we still have 46% of students in these big city districts in 4th grade unable to read. In math, for example, in 2003, 55% of all 8th graders scored below basic. By 2013, the percentage had dropped to 40%. A 15% decline in the number of 8th graders who could not do math reflects real progress. But while progress is being made, it is not happening fast enough. To get a sense of how critical and urgent the challenges are, we calculated how long it will take into the future to close the achievement gap between students in the big city districts as compared to students nationwide based on the rate of growth that occurred over the past decade. Considering that over the next 16 years, approximately 75 million children will be educated in these urban districts, it is imperative that we act urgently and effectively to ensure that students do not receive a below basic education. So with this by way of background, I'd like to direct the first question to Paul Vallis and then on to Rudy Crew. Paul and Rudy, together you have led at least 8 major school districts with more than 2 million children. In fact, during your tenures, as many as 9 million students were impacted by your work. Both of you were able to implement reforms that began the process of improving student outcomes. As you reflect on your tenure as big city chiefs, what reforms were most impactful in terms of student growth, and are they still in place? And what do we need to do right now to accelerate progress in student learning? Paul, do you want to begin?
Yeah, sure. Well, let me start off by saying there are essential practices that exist in all high-performing schools, whether they're charter schools, private schools, public schools. And when those essential practices exist, those schools perform. Let me summarize them. When you look at schools that are performing, they all have curriculum and instructional strategies aligned to standards, aligned grade by grade, with the instructional time on task to deliver those standards. Number 2, when you look at those schools, they all use data, formative assessments, to measure student and teacher progress so that you can begin intervening early in the process. If you have weak teaching, you can provide the support. If you have students that are struggling, you can provide the appropriate interventions. Number 3, they all have, they train. They have They have year-round training. They're school-based training, and they're trained to deliver the curriculum instructional models. Number 4 is instructional time on task. They all have allocated enough time to not only provide the basic instruction, but more even of equal importance, enough time to provide the interventions. And in 5th, and most important, is they all have instructional leadership teams. They're not dependent on a single principal. They've created a process by which the best and the brightest can move into positions of responsibility. It's like pay for additional responsibilities based on performance. In other words, those individuals work their way through the system, and the best and the brightest get the additional responsibilities and the additional compensation. And so the schools are being driven, the school reforms are being driven by strong instructional leadership teams. The TAP program is a classic example of create strong instructional leadership teams. Now, what is the role of government in supporting these type of initiatives? First, the role, whether it's a state or a central office administration, is to remove the obstacles to the implementation of these best practices. Number 2, to provide the models. Number 3, to provide the training. And when those things are done, you have high-performing districts. If you look at Philadelphia, and I had the pleasure of being in Philadelphia during Ed Rendell's administration, the state takeover of Philadelphia, for literally 7 consecutive years, test scores increased. They reached a point where they were increasing at every single grade in every single subject with no testing controversies. And it was because we were implementing these essential practices, and it was because each of the schools had these strong instructional leadership team models to drive instruction. You see the same thing in New Orleans. New Orleans is a 100% school choice district, but when the school models are approved, we look at the essential practices. We look at whether or not they have these strong instructional leadership teams. So, you know, having done this now for God knows how many years, and having learned all the things that I shouldn't be doing wrong, that I've been doing wrong, so that I can get them right the next time, those are common practices that you see in all high-performing schools. And the key is to remove the obstacles to allow those best practices to be instituted.
Paul, just one quick follow-up. So are those particular initiatives still in the districts you were in? Or as a result of the changing cast of mayors, governors, school board members, and so on, it's reverted back? I think in each of these reforms, or in each of these districts, in one way or another, they've shifted from supporting those individual reforms. I'm a standardization guy. I believe, I'm a strong supporter of school choice and obviously allowing children options, particularly poor children who might not be able to afford the options. But I'm also a believer that these common practices need to exist in all high-performing schools, whether they're traditional public or, for that matter, whether you're approving charters. In each of these cases, for one reason or another, they've deviated from those core reforms. But I'll go as far as to say that because I'm always, you never talk about, I have a rule, you don't talk about your predecessors, you don't talk about your successors. But by and large, with the exception of New Orleans, where those core reforms continue, and if one of the things I've learned over a 17-year period, I've gotten better at institutionalizing things, become an institutional man, so to speak. I would say with the exception of New Orleans, most of those districts have deviated from those strategies. Rudy, do you want to tackle the question for a moment? Maybe you could tell us what you believe were the most impactful reforms that you instituted when you were in New York City, when you were in Miami-Dade. But also, I'd like you to reflect on, do you know whether or not those reforms still are in effect within those districts?
Excuse me. Thank you. Let me take the second part of that question first. Generally speaking, no, they're not in place any longer. The politics of the day actually almost require that everybody put their name on their brand of whatever the education reform is. So even if it's working, the most sacrosanct issue is, was it mine? Did I start it? Can I take claim for it, et cetera? So to that extent, I would say, there are elements of what we started in New York or in Miami that are still there. But for the most part, it has, I won't even say morphed. It's actually been sort of reinitiated under something very, very different, called something now very different, done very differently. And no matter the fidelity, no matter the research about the fidelity to best practice, these things actually do go through political iterations long before they go through instructional iterations. So with that in mind, then, what I would say is, the things that I have observed as being, I would take absolutely no distinction, no difference at all from what Paul just said, except to say that there are a couple of elements that I think are equally as important. One is this issue of structure. The structure of schooling actually works against us. The day, the year, the way that it's all organized. I think the platform is simply the wrong platform for trying to come up with the kind of results we're trying to come up with. The current day is too short. The current year is too short. The use of intersessions and the time that students have off is too long and too, if you will, uneducational. So there are needs in my mind for thinking about how we would structure a day and structure a year differently that, in my mind, would factor strongly into this question. Secondly, I think that the issue of parents and community. I can't tell you one reform that I've been able to be associated with that did not involve a significant conversation with in the context of community and parent building in the home. We can ignore it and we can say that, particularly in poor communities, it's too challenging, it's too difficult. What are you going to do when, and you fill in the blanks, when the children are not even old enough to have children, and on and on and on. But the fact of the matter is, parents really still are a significant teacher in a child's life. And to that extent, they actually have to have some form of contact with an education system that allows them to know what to do in that role. And I don't think we've structured that very much. I think we sort of let it be, it's very episodic. We throw a few dollars at it through title programs here and there, but for the most part, there's not very much of a real focus on parents and community. Thirdly, I would say the issue of accountability, I think, went a little bit haywire. Accountability for a long time became sort of a watchword for, let's go find somebody doing something really bad. Let's go catch them. I would redefine that to say what we really need to do is to incubate best practice and hold systems accountable for being able to build the conditions or, if you will, stabilize the system such that best practice can flourish. Best practice in terms of teacher education and teacher training. Best practice in terms of parent and parent development. Best practice in terms of instructional excellence. Best practice in terms of the use of assessments and the multiple uses of assessments. I think that we sort of just, what this became was sort of a signature for let's go find somebody in some classroom somewhere who's doing something wrong and let's go make sure we can fire them. Not a bad thing, by the way, but not sufficient to be able to carry the day or instruct for real accountability.
Right. I mean, there's an issue in industry and business. Accountability is seen as an opportunity often to grow, for professional growth. Right. You want the feedback. Right. You want the assessment and so on. And we're just not successful in K-12 education yet to see the accountability, the evaluation, whatever the mechanism is, as an extension of professional development as opposed to something punitive. Right. Tony, obviously when you were at the U.S. Department of Education, trying to elevate the student growth, student learning in these large districts is a very important component in determining whether or not your initiatives and so on are going to make a difference. If you have as many as 15 million young people that are in schools that are not performing as we'd like them to perform, trying to elevate those students is key to what your goals are. So now that you've been out of the department, what has it been, about how long?
Almost 9-10 months. Yeah.
9-10 months. Maybe you could reflect back now, Tony, and tell us that whether it's through the competitive grants or whatever, what do you feel that the federal initiatives had in trying to improve student outcomes in these large districts, and what are the metrics that you use?
Sure, Lou. I'd say a couple of things. Just one, based on the facts, you showed some of the NAEP data. If you looked again at the large urban districts, and if you looked 2009 to 2013, which would roughly span the first term of the administration that I was in my role, I would say you'd find that the urban school districts 40 to 45% of them all had statistically significant gains. And as the whole cohort of about 18 large urban districts, basically in both 4th and 8th grade math, doubled what the national kind of gain was. Again, insufficient relative to the challenge, so it was only 4 points versus 2 points nationally. But again, 4th and 8th grade math across the vast or 40% of the districts. I think reading similarly outperformed national average. In some cases, you had 5-point gains in 8th grade reading, so substantial in terms of proficiency, but again, inadequate if you think. So you say, okay, based on that pure evidence, yes, urban districts have made significant progress in the last 4 to 4.5 years. If we think about some of the other things that we thought were important to try to accomplish, that I would argue disproportionately benefits districts. One's this notion of increasing the choice, the availability of potentially high-quality schools, controversial, continue to support charter schools. And in a Democratic administration, as you can probably appreciate, that's not always a popular political decision. And I think you've seen now that the greatest percentage of charter schools, both in number and in percentage of students. And it's had about a 12% compound annual growth rate in the last 3 years, which has been consistent pre-administration. So that movement has continued despite the political headwinds. And then we invested significantly in turning around the lowest performing schools in this country in the school improvement grant. Very controversial in that our belief, and I do want to come back to one other point, our belief is that strategy, here's what we learn in the private sector. Strategy, we'd say a good strategy, but it's all about execution. I think the other thing you learn is, but culture will eat strategy for lunch. And one of the fundamental issues we have is we do not have the right culture of high expectations. And that is really what is our challenge as we think about really trying to drive change. And complementing both what Rudy and Paul said, I think now you're talking about how do I really change a culture and a big change? We have insufficient leadership because you really need effective leadership to execute these strategies and build your instructional teams. What you find is in many of the places that we've traveled, what you find is they actually need flexibility, right? They need flexibility, back to I think Paul's point of get out of the way. What they find is some of the rules and policies that are kind of designed on average to be supportive can get in the way specifically with some of their initiatives, and that goes against building a culture. You need this leadership to actually build the parental and community engagement, right, to get the support. And frankly, what you find is with the complex financing, you find these effective leaders then are able to tap into incremental resources that are more flexible to support their instructional strategies. And so those are the things that are really, really hard to sustain and hard to do at scale. What we tried to do with our school improvement grant was to take the most failing schools in this country and to fundamentally go at that, where you had to replace the principal leadership and in many cases up to 50% of the teaching staff. Not they had to leave the education profession, they had to leave that school environment. Probably the most controversial program. And I would say our first set of cohorts, which were kind of the first schools that we went, admittedly the lowest, have had the greatest improvement, right, relative to the national average. And that has sustained through second year. So those would be things I would say, both by the evidence there's been material gain, by some of the policies we put forth, despite their political unpopularity among some key stakeholders, have ultimately been successful. But again, it's a long way to go relative to, as you said, if we're really going to close the achievement gap.
So let me turn for a moment now to issues of governance and influence of mayors and so on in trying to improve school districts. Let me start with Antonio. Obviously, when you were mayor, you made education a high priority. There were a number of challenges in your way. You've had successes, but I would assume that you would also say that you could have accomplished even more had you been given greater authority and greater opportunity to execute and so on. Antonio, maybe you could just reflect briefly on some of the greatest barriers that you face when tackling the issues of improving K-12 education in Los Angeles and the LA Unified School District.
First of all, let me thank you, Lowell, and the Milken Institute, because every year the issue of education is particularly K through 12, is front and center of this conference. Why? Because this is the economic issue of our time. When Tom Friedman says the world is flat and our kids aren't competing, he's talking about our kids, the kids that went to the best schools. They're not competing in math and science with Singapore, South Korea, and Finland. When you talk about kids in some of these urban schools, they're not competing with the developing world. when you look at the achievement gap. So it is the economic issue of our time. It is the democracy issue of our time. We need an enlightened, intelligent, literate citizenry. When you look at the number of people that are graduating and can't read, we got a problem. It is very much a civil rights issue of our time. If you were to break down the numbers by race and ethnicity, you would see overwhelmingly African American and Latinos not graduating, not going on to college in the numbers that we need in a country where, you know, we now have more than 50% of the kids that are born in America are of color. And, you know, if you listen to Stanley McChrystal and others, Connie Rice, Colin Powell, they say it's the national security issue of our time. This is a critical issue across the board. Let me lay the predicate, because you said, what are the things that kind of, the barriers? I worked for the teachers union for 8 years. I am unabashedly pro-union. I am not anti-union in any respect. But, you know, I got elected mayor, and Dick Reardon is here. Let me acknowledge the former mayor of Los Angeles. Dick had gotten involved in the schools. Bradley had expanded after-school programs. I think there are 180 through 80 LA's best programs. I did 60 of the 180, so, you know, we got involved in that. But we knew that we couldn't tinker around the edges, that we had to do something transformative. So we tried to take over the schools, partner with the schools, because different than New York or Philadelphia or Chicago, Boston, Denver, the mayor doesn't have control over the schools. And I tell people, when you think about a great neighborhood, you're buying a home, and most of you have bought one, what anchors a great neighborhood? What's the first thing you look at? The school scores. Well, great cities have to be anchored by great school districts, and as you can see, across the board, urban schools are not where they need to be. So we tried to take over and partner with the schools, rather. We went to the legislature. We got the authority to do that. We got sued by the then school district superintendent. By the way, we're very lucky to have these two folks, because they were, without question, two of the most transformative educational leaders over the last few decades. I didn't have one of those, unfortunately, at the time. They sued us. We lost at trial and on appeal on the question of whether or not constitutionally and by charter we could take over the schools. We then, working with people like Eli and Dick and others, Frank Baxter, who are here, we decided to address the governance issue, because so much of what needs to get done can't get done because the school boards are entrenched and put the interest of adults before the interests of kids. And we decided to get in the business of electing people that understood a lot of what Paul and Rudy has said. What's the model of a successful school? And as you know, I had Ray Cortines, who was one of those other great leaders. He was my deputy mayor at the time. We developed the elements of what successful schools look like, and we said we interviewed people who would be supportive of that. Over the last 8 years, the record is checkered. Tony will tell you, last year, Washington, D.C. and L.A. were the two most improved on the NAEP. Over the last 8 years, we went from 44% graduation rate to 67%. But think about that, 67%. It means a third of the kids are still not graduating from high school, not going to college, not graduating from high school. And those who do graduate, many of them can barely read and are below basic. So some of the impediments, I think, and by the way, the point that was made about school choice and options for parents and kids is critical. I believe in that notion. It's very important that we have models of success, that we incubate best practices, that we look at, you know, what works and what doesn't. I tell people accountability metrics have to be for all of us. It has to be for parents. It has to be for students. It has to be for teachers. It has to be for principals and administrators. Unfortunately, we don't have that. So early on, I took on, in addition to working with these individuals to try to influence what was going on in the school district overall, I took on 22 schools, 16,000 kids, the lowest performing schools in the city. Watts, downtown, and on the east side. These are the lowest performing schools. In fact, one of them was my alma mater, Roosevelt High School. Over the last 5 years, if we were a school system, most improved in the state. Now, having said that, they started at the bottom. But we have one school, high school at 800, which in the state is a successful school on the Academic Performance Index. We have 3 schools in Watts, elementary schools from 740 to 790, about to move to the 800. We did a number of things that real quickly I want to share with you. Parents, you said something. We started a thing called the Parent College. We got parents in our schools. We couldn't force them to do it because these are public schools with big union contracts and all of the rights. And we said to the parents, you have rights, roles, and responsibilities. You have to be involved in the education of your child. We got them to get up and say to their kids, I promise to be involved in your schooling and the like. We focused on collaborative principals and leaders. In every one of our schools, we provided incentives, paid them more to come to our schools, the toughest schools, because we believe that it starts with leadership. We invested in workforce training and teacher development, as was mentioned here, and we've been able to show success. One last thing I want to say about this. Part of the problem, and the reason why I wanted to share with you the predicate, I chaired the Democratic Party convention. As I said, I'm unabashedly a Democrat, a progressive, and pro-union. But a big challenge for us on these school boards were the teachers' union, frankly, at least in my city. Well, I think in Chicago and New York as well, but I'll let them speak to that. And it was because everything we tried to do that was different and new, every best practice, every effort to support successful charter schools, not unsuccessful, was met by resistance. You know, someone mentioned, you know, we've got to support our teachers, but 98% of every teacher got a satisfactory rating, even though in the vast majority of those situations, nobody went into the classroom to see what their teaching was like, and we already saw the numbers. So there was a lot that we had to address. We did a lawsuit addressing seniority and tenure, because in my schools, because they were in South LA and they were in the poorest areas, 55% of the teachers were new. In the rest of the school district, when they were laying off, 3%. So we were losing 55%. We took on the issue of seniority and tenure. We challenged the notion that evaluations could be done just based on, you know, existing and breathing. So those were the kinds of impediments, those are the kinds of challenges that we had that I think Chicago, New York, and some of the other cities have as well.
Very good. Ed, let me turn to you for a second. Obviously, you had a unique situation that you were both mayor in Philadelphia in a very challenging school district when you became mayor, and you've been governor of Pennsylvania and so on. Maybe you could reflect for a moment about your opinion about governance, about how important do you think mayoral control is, or do you think it's really just more about the individual being mayor and his power of persuasion and other aspects to get what needs to be done?
Well, first of all, never seen any evidence that the form of governance affects results. There is no evidence to that point. Secondly, education in America is a state problem. The cities, the urban cities, don't have the property tax base to support significant funding. Federal government kicks in about 7% of the total cost of education. The burden is on the states. Look at Pennsylvania. Governor Thornburg in 1981, 51% of the cost of the state's education came from the state. When I took over, it was 33%. I moved it up to 42%. My successor, for reasons that I'm not going to get into, dropped it down to 34%. It is a disaster, and we know what works. Paul Vallis, Rudy Crew, give them free hand, make them kings of the world. We can have an education system that can compete with Finland. But first, we've got to understand one thing, and we've endured the 800-pound gorilla. It is all about money. That doesn't mean that money is the answer, the sole answer to the problem, but it's about money. In Finland, you have to be in the top 10% on your college education entrance exams to enroll in a teaching college. In the U.S., statistics show we're getting the bottom third of the SAT people are the people who are going into teachers' colleges because we don't pay teachers. Let's pay teachers a competitive wage with the private sector. I would pay them slightly more than the private sector. Secondly, we ought not to have, I'm glad the Milken, this is my first time out here, and I'm sure it'll be my last when I'm finished. But, but I'm glad the Milken Center has this thing, but this should be a plenary session. Every one of the hotshot financiers here should be listening to this and should influence their government to do something about it. Number three, we do know what works, and we've got to give the districts, particularly the urban districts, the money to make it work. We know that a quality 3-year-old and 4-year-old pre-K experience makes a huge difference in outcomes. The science of education teaches us that. The president's right, but he can't get it through Congress. Every 3- and 4-year-old should get the same quality education that my son got going to Montessori school as a 3- and 4-year-old. Boom, they go into kindergarten. Well, in Pennsylvania, kindergarten's not even required by law. And when I took over, less than 1 out of every 4 schools had full-day kindergarten. We know that full-day kindergarten is the best way to reduce the achievement gap. Every school in America should have full-day kindergarten. We know that for kids who are falling behind, after-school tutoring, 1 teacher and 5 kids makes a huge difference, gets them right back to grade level. It should be mandatory, every school in America. We should have smaller class sizes. We should have teacher training. We should get the teachers involved in technology. And guess what, folks? Regardless of what you've been told, that all costs money. Every one of the things that I just said. It all costs money. Nobody should be giving blank checks to school districts. I agree with that. Because, you know, we've seen school districts squander blank checks. But give them the money to do the things that the science of education know work. Put the Rudy Cruz and the Paul Vallises in charge, and we'll be competing with Finland.
Could we see slide 867 for a moment? Do we have that slide? I want to comment on something that the governor just said. When you talk about money, we know that the U.S. compares among the highest in the world in the amount of money they spend per student in K-12 education. But you've raised another point, and that is, how can we structure the profession to attract talented people, our first point there, to become teachers, and then create an environment in which these individuals are developed, retained, and motivated to excel. And I would say, Governor, that certainly compensation, just in terms of pure salary, is a key element. But we need to restructure the profession, going to the point of fashioning roles and responsibilities where these kinds of talented individuals see a career path in education, whereas they work up the career path, they earn more money as a result of that effort, where they have greater influence in instructional activities that take place in the school. In other words, we need to transform the teaching profession if we have any prospect to compete against all the other opportunities that talented young people have in our nation.
You're absolutely right, Lowell. We got to train teachers better at our teacher colleges. In Finland, they actually teach, and they're observed by super teachers, and they're told what they're doing wrong and what they're doing right. They're actually, they're incentives. I'll give you an incentive. Anybody who goes into teaching gets their student loans eradicated. Get their student loans eradicated. We'll get the best and the brightest. We will do it. We can do it, and teaching is a great profession. You change kids' lives. There's nothing like it.
Right, but my point is further than that, is that maybe you will attract them in the profession, but if you don't change the structure once they're in the profession, to give them the kinds of roles and opportunities that truly influence policy, then they will become disenchanted, as so many do, and they'll leave the profession. To bring somebody into the profession for a year or two is not the answer. We need to transform. Tony, do you have or Tony? Do you
I would absolutely. If you look at the attrition, of relatively inexperienced novice teachers, it is tremendous in this country, and that's a problem. Right, within 4 years,
the first 5 years.
Yep. Exactly. So, and we actually have done some. We had done some at the time, some exercises, right, to say how could you actually do this? We could take this and we can have a conceptual conversation, but you say, well, what would it cost, and how do you mobilize the political will to do something like this? To throw something out for consideration, and then I'll say what the challenge is. Consideration would be, you could raise starting salaries. Interestingly enough, you only have to raise them about 20% to be competitive and actually start attracting a significantly higher kind of class of graduate. Right. Now, the teaching colleges need to raise their selection, and so it's a moneymaker. We have to realize they have an incentive right now to keep teaching colleges filled. So you have to address that. But assume you could. You actually raise starting salaries. The issue then would be, you keep them in a novice and don't grant them tenure for several years until they're proven, sort of demonstrated, and then they get a significant bump in 3 to 4 years based on their actual proven effectiveness in the classroom. And then now you can get potentially another 30% increase in salary, so a significant step up. And then to your point, this notion of having, in fact, a profession that allows them, if they still want to potentially earn 6 figures, they don't have to go on an administrative track. And right now, what you have is a lot of very effective teachers in the classroom who could, in fact, be mentor teachers, master teachers, mentor teachers. In China, they actually have an ongoing kind of professional continuing education requirement in a significant way. Many of the things that we see in other professions, you can actually embed, but you have to create a career track to do so. And right now, in many cases, you can't. Now, we could do this, right? You could consumably, and if you worked in other industries, right, you could say, okay, let's have a 2-tiered system, right? It's going to be hard to change the existing tenure structure, but could you actually, could you introduce this for your new hires? The challenge is, how do you sustain the political will, given that you're not going to see improvement in outcomes for an extended period of time, given it is a K-12 system is long. And that is always a challenge. If you're going to have to make the upfront investment, and then you're going to have to see that play out over the course of 10 years. And it's very difficult to sustain the financial investment and the political will that you would need to, while, in fact, you're really getting the return on that added.
That's actually a great point from a political standpoint. I've instructed our superintendent when I was mayor to do full-day kindergarten in '98. In 2006, my education policy person came into me breathless with the results from the state test. The Philadelphia kids who had gone through full-day kindergarten as 8th graders scored the highest in reading in the history of the city of Philadelphia. Now, Paul was responsible for some of that, of course.
I'm sure he'll take credit.
Let me challenge a bit the notion of just and I'm not saying that was what was said, but look, in the 1960s here in California, we were in the top 5 in per pupil spending, and we did have among the best schools in the country without question. Today, we're roughly 48th or so, I think, Tony, somewhere in that regard, and we're challenged as a state, no question about it. I was Speaker of the California State Assembly. I've been in the legislature. I was mayor. I'll tell you something. I've seen it again and again and again. People aren't going to spend more money if you're not showing them that you're doing more with the money you have. It's as simple as that. They're just not going to do it. And I don't mean it for an applause. They're just not going to do it. So the question is, how do we get them there? Well, we've got to show results. We've got to show results. In this state, this year, I said over the last 5 years, my schools were the most improved if we were a school system. Well, this year, we said we're not going to have an API. And there is lobbying as we speak that says we're not going to have an API, an academic performance index, to measure the success in the schools for the next 3 years. So schools like mine, high-performing schools, schools that are growing, aren't going to be able to demonstrate success. Evaluations. When people get a satisfactory evaluation just because they breathe and walk into a room, there's no way to really do the kind of pay for performance that you mentioned. I mean, ultimately, we know that there's a big difference between a highly effective teacher, an effective teacher, and an ineffective teacher. And being able to identify the highly effective, reward them, compensate them, is critical. Student growth over time. This has been a big battle where we say some of the evaluation, not all of it, but some of the evaluation should be evaluate a teacher based on where did the students start, where they ended up. That's not a radical notion. All of us, have those kinds of measurements. So one of the things I've said is we've got to get away from some of the doctrinarism. We've got to adopt best practices that look at, what works, what doesn't. We've got to be able to measure them. We do have to pay teachers more, without question, but we also have to be able, not everybody should be a teacher. I mean, not, anymore. I tell people, virtually in LA particularly, virtually every decision is based on seniority and tenure. I tell people, imagine if I had asked for a 3rd term and 42% of the city would have said, don't ask for a 3rd term because I left with a 58% approval rating. Imagine if I had run for a 3rd term and said, vote for me, I've been here the longest. You can't have every decision based on how long you've been there. We've got to be able to reward success and effectiveness, and we're really not doing that.
Well, so I think that, Antonio, I think that goes back to when you take a young person and a young person considers whether or not they want to become a teacher, the talented individuals are looking, and they're looking out to see what are the ramifications in this profession 5 years out, 10 years out, 15 years out, 20 years. If every decision's made based on seniority and so on, that's not an environment I think most young people are comfortable with today. Rudy, did you have a comment?
Yeah, what's interesting about this conversation is, in one form or another, it's a little bit like conversations we've all had at coffee klatches and in various forms of our own lives, and it always kind of, because of time, gets truncated down to, well, if we just did this one thing, if we just did improve this, if we just could do this, if we just could do that, put a little bit more money, and so on and so forth. I would argue that, somebody said a minute ago, if you gave Paul and me another opportunity to do it again, Paul, I don't know whether you'd sign up again, but I would. I think I got one more in me someplace. But if you gave me an opportunity to do it again, what I would say is, it's all of these things.
Yes.
It's not one. And the danger is the political, expeditious nature of the conversation ultimately degenerates into a conversation about the one or two things I can do in a 4-year stint, or the one or two things that I ran on, or the one or two things that I was hired in for. And so you then have to kind of artificially truncate what the real menu has to be. The real menu is going to be, you do have to improve teachers. You absolutely have to improve instruction in classrooms. And you have to involve a whole set of other disciplines, not necessarily just about teaching methodology, but you really have to think about how brain research has changed the way we understand how people develop cognitively and so forth. So the arts are a major piece of this conversation as it relates to building strategy for teachers. The war they're losing day to day in a classroom is the war of strategy. They don't have a repertoire wide enough to be able to really respond to the number of people that are sitting in front of them every day who deserve something very different than what they did or what they got when they were a youngster. So it's about teacher education. Yes, it's about money, but it's also about the effective use of this money. And I argue to you that, honestly, I have seen some of the worst schools in some of the highest per capita expenditures that go hand in hand. Right. I mean, I'm looking at people who've got warehouses full of materials, warehouses full of technology, never using it, don't want to break it open, don't want to tell the teachers they have to do it, don't want to have to do the PD, on and on and on. And so this whole question about money is sort of a non-starter. I think, as the mayor said a minute ago, you're not going to get America to simply say, let me pull this lever one more time on behalf of a tax benefit for people who fundamentally, I'm not sure what they did with the last revenue stream that they got. The third thing I would say is the standards we've been talking about, Common Core, with all due respect, the Common Core movement, if you will, is going to yield necessarily to a globalization conversation. It's what do you need to be able to put your feet under the table of a global world. It's not a conversation about did you pass your test and did you get the state score to get you off the F list or whatever it was in Florida. It's really a conversation about how do I function globally. And it's propitious that we're sitting here and having this conversation. I couldn't agree more with the mayor who said this really ought to be a conversation to people in the investment community, right? Because ultimately America is going to be defined not by whether or not our GDP goes up or down. That's always going to be the case. But whether or not our IQs in our classrooms are able to compete globally and whether they've got the skill set to be able to do that. Last, I would say we need to actually, if we were to do it again, you'd have to triple down on issues of literacy and mathematics and science. And it would almost be a kind of a, like, and I even said this to the administration at one point when y'all were talking to me. But I said, you know what, you ought to grab 50 or 60 school superintendents around this country. Pick them by congressional district, pick them however you want to, but pick 50 to 60 or 70 places around the country and lay out a quid pro quo. In effect, saying, here are the 3 or 4 or 5 things that we need done in your system, in your city. We need linkages with the business community. We need internships. We need globalization standards. We need Common Core standards. We need new assessments. We need, but do that and then say, we will help you fund that. We will help you fund that, but we want a quid pro quo. We want to demonstrate that that model works. So give us results. Give us results. Now, if you, in my mind, if you had 50 or 60 examples around the country that you could go to right now, I love your numbers up here around NAEP, but it's agnostic as to who's driving those numbers. Like what cities, what counties, what places around the country are actually driving these numbers and which ones are pulling it down, right? So the question for me becomes, in America, we've got to be able to demonstrate that we know how to make an investment in public education that can actually be a real quid pro quo, that there can be some real results that come from that now, not 10 years from now, not when we finish with pre-K, not when, because all those conversations are great, but they will not fill the bill of particulars right now.
Yeah, you know, the point, I've always had to be a on-the-job practitioner. I've been in a district where I had complete autonomy to charter, to create new schools. I've been in other districts where I couldn't lay off a single teacher or lay off a single principal, or in effect, or a country where I couldn't do that. And yet I had to make changes. So you take what the defense gives you. If there's something I've learned is, and I want to summarize my points again, but then I want to make the most critical point. One is, we know what works. You know, there's 5 essential things that exist in all high-performing schools. We know the models. It's you present the models to the schools, you remove the obstacles, you provide the training, and then you give them the stability so that every 4 or 5 years we're not jettisoning one reform and we're replacing it with another. You know, so that's critically important. Most critical in that reform is the development of this human capital pipeline. And what that means is you recruit the best and the brightest up front. It means you train them based on practitioner models, not esoteric training. You know, I always believe that you train to the task. The military trains to the task. When you go to military training, they don't teach you higher order thinking skills. They train you to the task that you are assigned. And then you promote the best and the brightest. You create a process by which the best and the brightest can take on more responsibilities. It's promotion and additional responsibilities and additional pay for performance. And then you have those strong instructional leadership teams. Let me give you an example. I was invited after the earthquakes to go to Haiti, and where I've been there now going on 60 times, and to go to Chile, where I spent about 6 months after the earthquake. You know, you right away realize that the Chileans don't need a lot of financial support. They don't even bond. They pay everything pay as you go. But they embedded us in the Ministry of Education, and they wanted us to target their lowest performing schools to come up with a plan to improve those schools. And the schools were supposed to volunteer to sign up. And 1,100 did. Easter Island wanted to participate too. They wouldn't let me go to Easter Island. So, so they kind of, that's the only place that they limited us. Anyway, to make a long story short, we could not bring in any new models because the procurement process, which is designed to eliminate any possibilities of favoritism, is a very extended, prolonged, agonizing process. So we literally had to go into the ministry and to do certain fundamental things. So we did. First thing we did was to take their curriculum and instructional materials, and this was a team out of Philadelphia and Chicago, retired veteran educators who had done a spectacular job, new curriculum instruction, new leadership. So we did 3 things. One is we took their curriculum instructional models and we, in effect, laid out a national curriculum that the failing schools could fall back on if they were struggling and if they were looking for models. So that meant taking all the materials that are out there and aligning them. The second thing we did was to design what we call our own RTI system, to create a series of interventions. Now in Chile, they have tracking. So conveniently 3 tracks. So we said 3 tracks, 3 tiers. Let's design interventions to get the students from one track to another. You have your RTI system. And then the third and most important thing we did was we you know, kind of plagiarizing the TAP model, we in effect created a local instructional leadership team model. The idea was to go into the schools and to identify and recruit the best and brightest within the schools and to create instructional leadership teams to drive instruction and to implement these reforms, to show the teachers how to do the curriculum reforms, to show them how to do the interventions. We trained 110 teams of Chileans, each of whom, 3-person teams, each of whom took 10 schools. And 2 years later, because it takes that long to get the results back, in these 1,100 schools where we could not change a single principal or a single teacher, not only had the reading scores increased, meaningfully, but the math scores that hadn't increased in years showed a significant jump. So just from that 1 year alone, because, and this is why I've kind of become an institutional guy. There are models. How do we bring this to scale? We've been talking about taking this model and that, and having little pilot programs here and there. It's we've got more pilots than most. We've got more pilots than most airports. It's time to build the airport. It's time to build the runways.
Paul, I'm going to have to interrupt you because
he was really gone.
Let me just make two final comments. Okay. First of all, I want to thank all of you. Most importantly, I want to thank you for your leadership on behalf of young people in our country. Boy, we have a lot of work to do. And secondly, we are going to take to heart your recommendation, and next year we will be in a much, much larger forum, because this is the most important issue.
Thank you
very much.